All right, good people. Welcome to episode 2 of Peeling the Onion. Yes, Peeling the Onion. My guest on the episode was the mighty Henry Rollins. It was such an honor to get the guy to take time off and to just get him to share some of his stories. He's been around since the 80s and he's done amazing work with Black Flag, Rollins Band. He's been doing spoken word since 1983 and he's been writing books since 1984. He's done about 40 books. I just read his newest book. I really liked it. Preparing for the show, I also listened to the audiobook of Get in the Van that he released in 94, and he actually got a Grammy in 95 for that one. And it's really good stuff. He's been around the block. So I hope you guys like that. My name is Elvar Elvarsson. I'm coming at you from Reykjavik, Iceland. We have about 4 hours of sunlight these days. Please come and visit. If you guys want to keep in touch, you can add me on Instagram. It's Peeling the Onion Pod. I'm gonna be posting like the next interviews, so you can just keep you posted when I put up episodes. If you want to send me a letter, you can also send me on peelingtheonionpod@gmail.com. And if you like the show, you can rate it and review it. That's helpful if you like what's going on here. That's about all I gotta say, I guess. So here's my conversation with Henry Rollins.
Can you see or hear me now?
Yeah, I can see and hear you.
All right. I'm a bit of a luddite, and so the fact that I got this Zoom thing together on my end is a small miracle.
What's a luddite?
A luddite is someone who doesn't know his or her way around technology.
Like, I'm doing the first Zoom interview, like I've never done it before either, so I had to Google some things.
Yeah, I've never set one up. I've just gotten used to doing them because of the modern age.
Right.
If you told me to set up a Zoom meeting on my end, I would be absolutely helpless.
All right. So, what's up, man? How you been? What have you been up to?
Well, I've been back off the road for about 6 weeks now. It'll be 6 weeks tomorrow, or that is to say I've been off the road for 41 days.
All right.
And mentally, it's healthy, at least for me, to get off a tour as quickly as possible. Like when the tour ends, it's not healthy to say, I've been home for 3 days, I've been home for 4 days. You just got to put it behind you and get on to the next thing. After touring for 2 years in 28 countries and doing 261 shows, that's not always an easy thing to do, because you go from one very regimented lifestyle where every workout is about, tour, every bite of food, everything you do is about the next leg of the tour starting, or you have a show that night, or you're flying to a show, or whatever. And then I come back here to my home, and I can do things all day. I can not. Time becomes far more fluid, and there's less urgency. And quite honestly, I prefer the urgency, the schedule, and I have a lot to do. But there's nothing like the pressure of being on stage at 8 p.m. to focus the mind. And so here, I have a ton of office work to do. My 24-hour gym, which I love, is 2 traffic lights away from me.
Nice.
So I have no excuse to miss a workout. And food and the mail are a few traffic lights from my small and uninteresting house. And so I have to maintain a vigorous schedule without the incentive of, you've got a show tonight. And so to switch back to that kind of metabolism and discipline is kind of trying. But I'm kind of good at it now, in that I'm not all that new at this. So that's what I've been doing,
Right.
getting used to the home routine.
You've been in Nashville now for what, like 2 years?
About 2 years, yeah.
Like you had been in LA pretty much since you left DC with Black Flag, right? Like good 40
Yes,
years.
over 40, about 40 years, yeah. There was a time in the 1990s, I was living in New York and Los Angeles, where my bandmates were New Yorkers. And so I was living with them. So I'd rent an apartment, get a year lease, but I was still paying rent in Los Angeles. And so I was bi-coastal, for like 3 or 5 months at a time for a few years. But by and large, yeah, I lived in Los Angeles.
I just think it's amazing how long you stayed there because, like, judging from your work, you absolutely hated it.
Yeah, it's just kind of laziness. It's just kind of, I tell people, it's where my futon and my milk crate of broken stuff kind of ended up after Black Flag broke up.
Okay.
And I'm an East Coast person. And I don't know if you've ever spent any time in the United States. I can't necessarily recommend it. But the East Coast mentality and metabolism is very different than the West Coast, where the East Coast is very much, if you've ever been to New York or been around a New Yorker, high metabolism in your face. They take up a lot of room, and, they're obviously wonderful. The West Coast variety of Americans are a bit more relaxed, no less deadly. It's just a different metabolism whatsoever. And after many years of living there, I never really assimilated. But when I'd be in Washington, D.C., where I come from, visiting people I grew up with, I would feel very L.A. when I was there. But perpetually in Los Angeles, I always felt very East Coast. Like nothing moves fast enough. People are just too nice. We just don't believe it. And it hit me a few years ago that, I'm not young anymore. And my manager, she said to me, she's really smart. She said, you really want to grow old in this city? And I went, wow, that's a good question. No, is the answer. And let's make some plans. And so the last 2 years have been like living in an environment with gravity. That is to say, in Tennessee, you have seasons. It rains.
Right.
There will be snow in a couple of weeks. You have to, go get your food because my road will be undrivable for like 2 to 4 days. And I have an economy car. I'll just slide all the way down to the highway. And so deer are on my lawn. People ring the doorbell on Halloween. There's humans in my neighborhood with kids who want candy on October 31st. And in Los Angeles, every day is kind of this anonymous, cloudless, hot, baked desert hell. And when it rains, you stand outside like it's raining. You celebrate because it's like 4 days a year for 30 minutes at a time. We're here, it rains all the time and it gets cold and it gets hot and the leaves come off the trees. And I think it's healthy for a human to have those seasonal changes. And I truly look forward to them. And it's been, I kind of live in my office. I'm working every day on kind of boring projects that must get done. And I take frequent breaks. Like once an hour, I just go outside and just look at the trees and smell the air because it's so gorgeous around here. Where in
Nice.
Los Angeles, you stand outside and you get covered with a layer of soot. Truly, like anything outside gets covered with like this kind of layer of car exhaust. Like, your car, like the windows get dirty because of the air. And here, it's just nothing like that. And, Tennessee, the state, has a lot of work to do. It's a, if you will, red state
Uh-huh.
who is, afraid of science and literacy and men dressing as women and reading to children in libraries on the weekends. I think they're afraid of men in drag inspiring young people to want to read. I think that's the main fear
Yeah,
because they
it's
might
kind of
read it.
far south, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's very different than the hopey, changey, blue state I was living in for 4 decades.
Right.
But having been born and raised in Washington, D.C., it borders Virginia and Maryland. And so you're kind of in the South in Washington, D.C., where if you go out to the suburbs, there's a lot of hey, man. And so I was raised with that. And now I'm just kind of surrounded by it again. It's not for me to make fun of people, but people here in Nashville, they call it Nashville friendly, where people are so incredibly polite and nice to each other here. It kind of makes you a better person. Like I would like to think I'm polite to everybody, but people are just really incredibly cool here. Like I have not met one dud yet. And there's a lot of people with their Make America Great caps again and Biden lost bumper stickers and all of that. And sometimes I'm the only car in traffic. I'm surrounded by pickup trucks. But that person, with his guns in his pickup truck, he will help you fix your flat tire, like right now.
Right.
Like, and that's, I must say, I'm having a really good time here.
So I want to wind it back to the 60s. You were born in Washington, D.C., right?
Yeah, 1961.
Do you remember what kind of music was around you? And what was kind of the first thing to catch your ear?
Well, I had a mixture of good and bad in that my mom had pitch perfect taste in music. I was raised on Bartok, Stravinsky, Beethoven, Wagner, Strauss, Chopin, Miles Davis, Charles Mingus, John Coltrane, Glenn Campbell, Bob Dylan, Bobby Gentry, Dionne Warwick, show tunes like Jesus Christ Superstar and Hair, Porgy and Bess, Hello Dolly, Barbra Streisand. Like my mom went to the record store up to 2 nights a week.
Nice.
And the record player rarely was not spinning. She would use our tiny television to watch news, and pretty much the rest of the time it was off. And the only time I could turn the TV on was if she was out. Because I'd turn the TV on, she's like, oh, come on, let's put on a record. I'm like, okay. And so I was raised in this music-centered, tiny apartments. And no matter where you are, if the music is on in the living room, you're going to hear it in your bedroom because the apartment is as big as a phone booth. And so I was raised on music, adult music, as a little kid. And then somewhere around 4th grade, which would be like 1970 something, I had Beatles records. I just liked the Beatles. I still do. And I'd go to the record store and my mom would go like, well, here's Abbey Road. And I had a record player in my room. So as far as records that I attached myself to, it would be Beatles records. And then, my mom would be playing something in the living room. I go like, well, put that one on again. And she would just go, here, take it. And she'd buy another copy. And so I ended up with this weird hybridized record collection in my bedroom of like Isaac Hayes, the Hair Broadway soundtrack, and the Beatles. And so my mom's like adult records. And the Beatles, I think, they made songs for everybody. So a little kid can get into an octopus's garden. Mm-hmm. But I'd be listening to, like Beethoven and Wagner, like on my own. I just liked the music. It was dramatic and scary and, crazy. And so at an early age, I had a fairly good grip on music for a weird little kid.
And then you experience punk rock, in the mid-70s?
Yeah, I mean, before then, I had a Sony clock radio with a single speaker, an AM/FM clock radio. And that turned into my stereo system because FM radio is now called classic rock. But a long time ago, that programming, mainstream FM radio on the East Coast in the 1970s was oddly eclectic in that you would hear Stevie Wonder, like songs from the Key of Life, right into Ted Nugent, right into Kool and the Gang, then into Van Halen, Aerosmith, and then Gladys Knight and the Pips. Like there's this weird mix of R&B and soul and arena rock, like on one station, WPGC. and that was like the local rock station. But they would play the Eagles and Earth, Wind, and Fire. And so in an hour, you would hear this melange of R&B, soul, hard rock, Zeppelin. And so I really liked that eclectic idea, in that I loved Gladys Knight and the Pips as much as I liked Aerosmith. But and then I was, I had a job. I would buy my own records to, demarcate my own territory. And that was Led Zeppelin, Van Halen, which might sound kind of funny now, but in those days, these bands would come to town. And, I saw Led Zeppelin. I would see Ted Nugent, Van Halen, Aerosmith. Me and Ian MacKaye from the band Fugazi, we would go together because we can't get into a club because we're underage. And so it was arena rock that allowed us to buy a ticket and go. And the concerts were okay, but it's like you and 18,000 people, and the acoustics aren't great, and all you can smell is marijuana and vomit. And it just wasn't, you never felt like you were part of it. You just felt like a spectator. And then punk rock took over our lives. And I think in one expansive time, we saw Led Zeppelin, which was great in its own way, really great. But then on February 15th, 1979, we saw The Clash at the Ontario Theater in Washington, D.C., which I think is now a condominium, and with Bo Diddley opening. And that was I only found out several years ago that Bo Diddley was a Washington, D.C. resident. In front of his house, there's now a plaque. I had no idea. Anyway, where that house is located, he could have walked to the Ontario Theater for the show. But so we were listening to The Clash and the Ramones, like early punk rock, like what we could get on the East Coast, because a lot of those records were imports. And then we would start going to clubs, and we never went back to the arena again, because we're seeing the Cramps and the Ramones and Sham 69, and we're driving up to New York to see shows, and we're seeing the Bad Brains. And then, suddenly all of your friends are in bands. Like Ian is in the Teen Idols. He starts Discord Records. And then a year or so into that, he forms the band Minor Threat. And so music became this thing where you're standing in front of the band and you can reach your arm out and hit the guy. Right. Because there's no barricade. And the biggest show you'd go to would be at the Ontario Theater to see the Cramps or Buzzcocks or something like that. But mainly, you were in small clubs or at house parties. And all these bands like the Bad Brains and Teen Idols, or Minor Threat, would play at house parties. And you'd see these bands playing next to a couch in front of a TV, because they're playing in mom's living room or the basement. And you'd go to band practices. I would go to see Minor Threat play in the guitar player's parents' basement. And, you get a free Minor Threat show. How cool is that? And this is before they even did their first show. And so that transition into punk rock would be 78, 79. That was the music that did the lasting damage to myself and the people I grew up with. And to this day, literally decades later, Ian MacKaye and I, he's my best friend, we're still talking about it. I mean, we're talking about The Damned via text about 15 minutes ago.
That's awesome. But I can imagine it was just more alive, more real, more here,
Yeah, with the arena rock experience, you feel just like I'm not putting it down, but you're so distant from the thing, and you're never going to meet the band, and that's not important. You don't need to meet the band necessarily, but the difference between you and the person on stage, they're rock gods. I saw Jimmy Page and Robert Plant play. It was great, but it's unapproachable. And then, you can walk right up to the front of the stage and look up, and there's Joe Strummer. And that, or, you get sweated on by Lux Interior or Dee Dee Ramone. and like you can feel the kick drum, like because your stomach is against the stage. You are that close. There's no barricade. There's no security. It's just you and the music, and that kind of bringing the you plus music, like bringing those two things together so vividly, so intimately. It's just the difference between the real thing and a picture of the real thing. And for me, it was intoxicating. Like it was overwhelming. Like summer 79, I graduated from high school, and I'm free. I'm an adult. I had no ideas of college, and I'm now able to go into clubs. And so that summer, I saw the Bad Brains open for the Damned at a place called the Bayou in Washington, D.C. It's probably a condominium now, but it was like a rectangular beer barn where the security would beat the hell out of you. Just a rough room. And it's the first time we saw the Bad Brains. And it's right before they were going to make their legendary demo tape in August of that year. They became the Black Dots album on Caroline Records. And to see music that insanely genius, like to see the Bad Brains for the first time and then see the Damned like 20 minutes after the Bad Brains go off for the first time, well, I never recovered from that.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And seeing the Cramps like play bars is like you and 75 people. There's just no coming back from that. And it was, I have to say, probably the most decisive, influential thing in my life was being young at these shows. I'm still a record collector. I have a radio show. I'm obsessed with music. And this is like all happening 40 some years ago. I'm old and I'm still kind of in it. I'm not trying to be young. I don't miss my youth. I'm fine where I am. But that music and those people really impacted me.
So you traveled with the Teen Idols, Ian Mackay's first band, in mid-1980 out to California.
Yep.
Do you remember, like, it was a different scene out west, wasn't it?
Very much. And it made myself and my colleagues feel a bit amateurish in that, California is a very forward-leaning state. I mean, it's given you movies and the IT world. And, as far as American culture, it's probably going to happen in New York and Los Angeles first. And then slowly it will get to Nashville. And so the Southern California punk rock scene and the San Francisco punk rock scene, there's all kinds of venues. There's radio support. There's like record stores that are helping with the shows. And Washington, D.C. had that a little, like one radio station, a couple of record stores, and a handful of bands. And California, it was like this punk rock industry where there's tons of people at shows and everyone's got this look. And, the bands are getting radio play. It's like this really happening thing. And the music is really, really good. And so we went out there to California and we encounter the Circle Jerks in San Francisco. The Teen Idols are going to play one night. The Circle Jerks are already up there. And so we meet the Circle Jerks. And that would be Keith Morris, the original singer in Black Flag. And Ian and I are standing in front of the guy from the Nervous Breakdown EP. It's like, meeting Skinny Elvis.
You had heard the EP by then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we knew who Black Flag was.
Okay.
As far as like the 4-track 7-inch record. But you're standing in front of the guy? Like, that's impossible. And on that same afternoon, we meet Keith Morris. And then like about 3 minutes later, we met Tony Alva, who's like, the Keith Richards, Mick Jagger of skateboarding. And like, we know him from pictures in magazines. And we're standing in front of him. And this was, we're like, these corn dogs from Washington, D.C., which is, believe it or not, kind of small town compared to Los Angeles, San Francisco, which are these like throbbing cosmopolitan scenes. D.C. is about politics and power. These cities are about art and culture and danger. And we saw the Circle Jerks play, and the music was like blinding. Like it was like so good. And we saw how the audiences were reacting, and it blew our minds. Like we kind of like went back to Washington D.C. telling our friends about like these 10-foot tall people we'd seen in California, because like everyone seemed like legendary. And a lot of the people we met ended up in that film Decline of Western Civilization by Penelope Spheris. And so if you want to see, it's a really good documentary on punk rock. Yeah, but if you want to see the people that we met, almost all of them are in that documentary. And so that trip to California really was a big, because we saw what could be. You see that a scene can be bigger. And Ian really started working on Discord Records, and like networking, like getting other people's like numbers and addresses. And he called SST Records one day and met Greg and Chuck of Black Flag, because that's Ian. He just gets on the phone and gets it going. And so suddenly he's in touch with like the Necros in the Midwest, and they're exchanging records. And he's writing bands in New York, and he's sending them records, and like he's starting to develop a network for himself, like, because maybe he wants to go out there and play, or he wants to sell that record in a record store on the West Coast, which in those days, was a almost impossible idea, but not for Ian. And so it was that time on the West Coast in summer '80 where we just had our minds blown, and we kind of saw, the future. And by the summer of 1981, like about a year later, I'm living in California. I'm I'm the singer in Keith Morris's old band. It's crazy, and it reads like a screenplay, but all of that happened.
I mean, how did it feel? One day you're in like a 9 to 5 steady income, an apartment, and next like you're sleeping on floors, but
Yeah,
like you're in your favorite band, you know?
yeah. It was like it was winning the lottery, but you have to understand. Now we're talking in like 2024, and I all of this is behind me. But in those days, going from wearing an apron and a paper hat, serving ice cream, living in a small apartment with my roommate, these are very normal young person routines. Minimum wage work, enough money to, get by, pay your rent, and all of that. And suddenly, you're an extraordinarily low budget rock star. Um, it was so real. It was surreal in that it was obviously happening, but it just seemed like I was in a dream state. Like I'll never forget when I went up to New York and auditioned to be in the band, and they said you're in. I said, in what? They said, in Black Flag. I said, me? They're like, yeah, like, wake up. And I went back to Washington, D.C. that afternoon on the train with like, the lyrics in my fist, thinking, I got to quit my job. I got to pack my stuff. I'm leaving. It was crazy. And like a week later, I'm in that van heading west. And it was, and by, August, I'm on stage with Black Flag, like playing all over. And by November of that year, October of that year, somewhere, we're in a studio, which is now a bank, different building. We're recording the first ever Black Flag LP, and that's me. And I think back on those days, and I'm not one who lives in the past, but if we're talking about it, it was it, things like that don't usually happen to me. And, that kind of thing absolutely happened to me. Crazy then, crazy now. I still think about it like, wow, that's nuts.
Yeah. So you recorded an EP in 1981 with your first band SOA.
Hmm.
How was it different recording with Black Flag?
Well, the band I was in at first, we had like 35-second songs, and our shows were like 9 or 11 minutes in length, mostly tuning up and arguing. It was what it was. And then suddenly you're in this band that would practice like 5 hours a day, where SOA practice is like 35 minutes of arguing. Then I got to go to work. I have homework. And like, everyone would kind of argue and leave. Black Flag was like, you put your bite plate in, put your helmet on and went into the game. And I said, I'm ready. They said, you're not ready. And like 6 weeks, 2 months later, of like 5 or 6 days a week band practice, like all day into the night band practice, then I was ready. And I started to realize what hard work is. Because, I've been working hard in my minimum wage life. And then I joined Black Flag and I realized these guys, they're from a different bolt of cloth, if you will. And their ambition, they're not trying to be big, rich rock stars. Like music like Black Flag, you're never going to make a lot of money. That's just not going to be. But they just wanted to take over the world. And so imagine walking, at a normal pace, and you join a band where everyone is sprinting, and suddenly you have to learn to sprint. And it was a learning curve that was basically sheer vertical. And so I was 20 and, and angry and hyperactive. Like I got into it. And suddenly you get better at the songs and you start to understand where the bass and the drums are. And you realize what dedication and practice means and how seriously your bandmates take this. And then you realize, hey, I'm in the band too. I must take this as seriously. I never didn't take it seriously. I took it very seriously. But it just basically would redefine your definition of serious. And that was the first like 8 months of being in Black Flag. And so I'm in the band by July. By December, I'm in England, like touring England with Black Flag, being spat on,
Right.
and playing with the Damned. And like, I used to go see the Damned, as a fan. And now I'm on the same stage with them. And I'm not saying I'm a peer of the Damned, but I'm on the same bill. That's different. And, those guys are friends of mine to this day, the nicest people you'll ever want to meet. But it was a life change, I think, is kind of underselling it. It was like being broken down and reassembled as something else. And that is the product of that 5 years of being in Black Flag is basically made me the person I am now. It's like when people tell you about like when I was in the Marines or like my time in the Army or, my time in the Peace Corps, whatever. It was my time in Black Flag that got me ready for pretty much every single other thing I've ever done since. From starting my own companies, making my own records, writing my own books, being kind of fearless and going out into the world and like trying to be in movies and stuff like that. I learned, because I'm not a tough guy, I'm not brave, I'm not ambitious, but I learned to like get out there and put your face in the place from being in Black Flag. Because on my own, I live alone, I work alone, I hardly see anybody. I talk to more people at the post office when I pick up my mail than I do. This is the only communication I've had via like phone or whatever. Since I've been back here about 6 weeks, I've talked to Ian a few times. I've talked to my manager twice. Past that, I've not spoken into a telephone.
Okay. But reading your tour diaries from that trip to England that you guys did, getting spat on every night, people putting out cigarettes in your body.
Yep.
And like throwing urine at you, and then you don't have a shower backstage. It just sounds like something that would break a person,
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it broke me a few times.
Yeah.
But the strength, well, at least my experience has been, you get the strength from the breaking. Like if you can't be broken, I think it's better to be broken so you understand that you can be broken and that you can also get back up. You want to learn to win, learn to lose. And I think that's healthy advice, because losing is nowhere near as good as winning. And you learn that by losing. And so my bandmates were infinitely tougher than I was. And so I had to learn all of that. And by the time we finished the summer tour in 1982, which I think concluded on July 6, 1982, in California, I had been in the band about a year, like a year and a week, something like that. And I was a much different person than the one who left the ice cream store.
So do you think there's like a sociological reason behind the violence, or was it just the way things went back then? I went to shows here in Iceland in the early 2000s. I never experienced anything like the thing that you're.
Well, I think there's a number of reasons that it could be. First off, the difference between the United States and Iceland. And I'm not putting either place down. I'm just saying I think we can both agree that the cultures, while Western, money, retail, gasoline, cars, bills, condominiums, all of that is the same. But the United States is a very different patch of real estate, a very different concept, a very different history, and just a different, proverbial kettle of fish than anywhere. And so as far as violence, I don't know much about Iceland. I've been twice. It was beautiful. The United States, and you know enough of the brief and bloody history of the United States, birthed in invasion, genocide, slavery, graft, corruption, and institutionalized racism. That's the history of the United States, no matter how many members of Congress don't want students to know that. And it's not changed that much. The slavery has gone into the infrastructure. It's called minimum wage. And so America is a violent place. And so in the late 1970s, early 1980s, in the United States of America, you have a country that's still recovering from the Vietnam War culturally, still recovering from Watergate and Nixon and corruption in the Oval Office. And of course, America's going through it again now. And so young people plus drugs plus violence plus Ronald Reagan, and that's a big deal. And him trying to clean up the streets of young people, gay people, and anyone on any kind of substance. The pushback was incredible. And as happens in a lot of youthful cultures, when young people, in my opinion, should be pushing back against the man or the government, law enforcement, bad teachers, bad parents, quite often the people in that culture start attacking each other. Like you see gangs in America, like Bloods and Crips. Like cops hate both gangs. The government and the FBI hate both gangs. Why are the gangs killing each other? Like you guys, like you're being hunted. You're both hated by the same people. Why are you making it easy for these guys? Like you're so arrestable with what you're doing. Like knock it off. Like stop it. And so in the punk rock scenes in the United States, in about 1986, a lot of the big city scenes, Chicago, New York, some of these scenes had that violent element. Los Angeles was intense, like Clockwork Orange level. Like you'd see stuff, you're like, is that guy going to be okay? Like you'd see some really bad things. Washington, D.C. got bad for a while. New York was, like a punch up all the time. I'd be watching it from the stage.
Mm-hmm.
There'd be stabbings at our shows. And, thankfully they didn't stab me, but I don't want a young person stabbing anybody. Are you kidding? That's crazy. And so I noticed by around 1987, a lot of the skinhead scenes in the United States, like punk rock scenes, a lot of those men and women had grown up, or now they're having kids, or they've joined the army, or they're now your local cop, or they died.
Right.
Or they just got a beer habit, and just, and they just put on weight and got a normal job. And that kind of hyper violent scene seemed to like ebb away with the sunsetting of the Reagan administration. And I'm not trying to blame one president for a cultural upheaval. I'm just saying those times were really intense.
Right.
In the 1980s, in the UK, you've got Margaret Thatcher, which had punk rock culture boiling, and a lot of people in England angry. And simultaneously, in the United States of America, you've got Ronald Reagan, who, besides Donald Trump, ironically, will be the other transformational president of my lifetime. And so, in the United States, between Reagan, police forces in major cities trying to understand what to do with punk rock, like in Los Angeles, they would just beat the hell out of people, the LAPD. Those days could often be hyper violent as the people in those scenes basically internalized the abuse and turned it on each other. And I noticed a lot of that behavior kind of faded away as the 80s came to an end. And I think that could be saying goodbye to Ronald Reagan and saying hello to MTV, and how a lot of that culture got co-opted. And by the 1990s, you can go to a shopping mall and buy jeans that already have holes in them because your child wants to look grunge. And so, as Greg Ginn of Black Flag so wisely said, as it's been said, the revolution will not be televised. He said, well, the revolution will be televised. And he could not have been more correct. And the revolution was televised, and it continues to be. And now we all watch. And so I think that was the major cultural reasons why punk rock scenes in the United States could be so violent. And basically, what you had was people of your own age coming to shows who are homophobic, misogynist, and racist. They're basically like their fathers. And punk rock to them was just a bunch of people who needed to get their asses kicked. And it was too bad, but it happened quite often.
Right. I want to wind back to the 80s for Black Flag, because you guys were halted by the Unicorn label lawsuit. You couldn't release anything for like the whole duration of 1983, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And then you released, 4 albums in 84?
Yeah, well, Greg Ginn, at that time, he's like the band's leader and principal songwriter. The guy's writing songs like pretty much every day. And so through litigation, Black Flag, and I had nothing to do with it. I don't own SST Records. That's like SST Records is owned by members of Black Flag, but not this member of Black Flag. Anyway, Greg Ginn and Chuck Dukowski get into legal hot water with Unicorn Records, and there's a stop put on Black Flag making records because of some court decision. Meanwhile, Greg is writing songs, and so we are touring, playing entire full-length shows, complete with encores, of music that's not on records. And, there's no better way to anger an audience by playing them 90 minutes of music they have never heard and not playing the songs they have heard. And those audiences, they really want the songs they're familiar with, not necessarily the most open-minded bunch all the time. And Greg's new music would be vastly different than what had come before. And so there's this period, late 82 through early 84, where Black Flag is writing songs and touring, getting, mixed reactions of this new music because there's no album to help someone say yes or no to buying a ticket to go to the show. So they go to the gig hoping for the songs from the Damaged album or songs previous to the Damaged album. And they're getting, Greg Ginn's new compositions, which are often like 4 to 7 minutes long at like half the speed of the previous material, which would be the Slippin' In and My War album material, which we had by the end of 1982. We were playing a lot of those songs, and they didn't hit vinyl until like 84. And so that was a very interesting time. Like we're playing in Europe with those songs, and people are like not all that happy all the time. And they always take it out on the singer, of course. And so then by the time we were able to record, and Greg and Chuck had somehow extricated themselves from the legal hassles, we had this incredible surplus of music. And so we would rent studio time like we're living in the studio. And we became this like song recording factory where the band would go in and just record. Sometimes they recorded songs like instrumentals that I had never even heard. That's how many. And then Greg would give me the lyrics later. He goes, here. And like he's writing them that fast. And that's why My War, Slip It In, and I think Loose Nut, all of that happened kind of like in one, kind of exhalation. Because, we kind of had all those songs almost at once. And Greg, I'm sure, I haven't seen the guy in 100 years, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's still writing at that kind of metabolism. I mean, it's in him, it's what he does. But it was a tough time to be in that band because you couldn't show the audience, like you couldn't give them a preview of what they were going to get. And you had to deal with their often violent reaction or great disapproval or uncertainty on the night. And again, as I told you before, there's no barricades. And when the audience, the one drunk guy in the audience who doesn't like this song that he's hearing, he usually takes it out on the singer. And that's where the cigarettes go into the legs and the ashtray gets thrown at my head and on and on. And it's not for me to go, well, he wrote it. You just suffer the slings and arrows. And so that was I characterized that time of like, being in the wilderness, just trying to keep moving as best we could.
You started doing spoken word around that time, like back in 83, right?
1983, correct. Yeah, there was
that just to fill up time because there was a considerable reduction in tour dates that year for Black Flag? I saw that.
Well, yeah, no, there was a good amount of time we were like just stuck because again the court case. But we would do shows to pay the rent, but like touring was knocked out for at least 12 months or 14 months. But there was a local promoter in Los Angeles. He's no longer promoting, but he's still around. Pretty interesting guy. And he would put on these shows in Los Angeles. He would just like find a club and book a night. And he would get like 15 people on the bill. And everyone gets like 5 minutes or 6 minutes. And it'd be poets, actors, the guy from the Gun Club, the guy from the Minutemen, the bass player of Black Flag, plus like 2 well-known poets like Wanda Coleman, like who's passed away, but like an award-winning poet, and like an actor from the film Taxi Driver. And you'd see all these names on this flyer, and like, it's a $6 ticket, so you go. And Chuck Dukowski, the bass player in Black Flag, he would often be on these bills, and he'd go on stage and talk for like 5 minutes about the end of the world or one of his like, Darwinian Nietzschean hellscapes he would describe. And I would go because we lived in the suburbs. We lived by the beach, and these shows happened in Hollywood. And so I would get in the van and go into the city with Chuck to look at those Hollywood people. And one night at one of these shows at a place called the Lhasa Club on Hudson and Santa Monica in Los Angeles, the promoter said, "You got a big mouth, Henry. Why don't you be on the bill the next time around?" And I said, I don't know what I would do. He said, "Well, we're paying like $5, per person." I said, "I'll take that money because, in those days, $5, that will buy you a lot of dented avocados." And so, weeks later, I'm on the bill for 5 minutes. And I told a quick story about what had happened at band practice the day before, where a white supremacist tried to run over Greg Ginn outside of band practice. And I read a couple of things I had written on a folded piece of paper in my back pocket. And I looked at my watch. I go, "Well, my time is up." And I get this big applause and all these people going, "Do more." I'm like, "Well, my time is up." And after the show is over, people are coming up to me like, "When are you doing that again?" I go, "What do you mean? Like, when are you going to go up there without a band?" I'm like, "Well, never. I got this $5 bill, I'm out of here." And the promoter guy, he called me days later, said, you're a natural on your own on stage. Like, you've got it. How about let's put you on stage for like 15 minutes and you'll open, he managed a bunch of people, and you'll open for one of my poets. Okay. And then within 6 of those shows, that poet is opening for me because I become the draw. And these poets were not that happy about it. And that was like summer 83 or at some point in 83. And by 85, I was going across the country doing shows on my own, drawing between 15 and 50 people. My goal was to one day draw 100 people. And then somewhere in 1985, I was flown to Holland to be part of a poetry festival where I'm, on this bill with Jeffrey Lee Pierce and William Burroughs and all these people. And like, I'm in Holland, which I'd been to before with Black Flag, but I'm here on my own because of my writing. I mean, I was on the same bill as Linton Kwesi Johnson. I mean, it was just, okay, here's something else I can do. And that led to me starting my own little publishing company so I could put out my crappy books. And again, that's like learning the DIY thing from Discord and SST. You don't try and get your books signed at a printing press or a book company. You make your own company, of course. Like, you don't even think about sending a manuscript somewhere. You just print something up and sell it at shows, or, mainly in those days, you just gave them away. And so that became this thing that I was in your beautiful country, I think on February 1st of last year. The first show of last year was in Reykjavik, Iceland. So it's turned into a thing that takes up about 28 countries in 2 years to, kind of take laps around the world to complete. But it started with a 5 or 7 minute set with a bunch of cool people at a small club in Los Angeles many decades ago.
And a less violent audience, or what?
Far less, yeah.
Okay.
And it became a thing, a bit of contention with a certain members of Black Flag. By the end of Black Flag, I'm getting the same amount of press on my own. Like, press people would come to, the afternoon of a Black Flag show, like, hey, we're Channel 7, okay, local news, and we're here to talk to Henry. Well, what about the band? Well, we want to talk to Henry. And the photographer wants to take photos of Henry. Well, what about the band? No, it's okay. Like, we just want Henry. And that became kind of a bit of tension. And it started to happen more and more. And then, hey, this film wants you to audition for a part. And sometimes in some cities, I would outdraw Black Flag on my own. And yeah, I don't know what to say about that. And so it didn't make me think any differently about my duties in the band. I just, I was just figured I'm young. I have a lot of energy. I'll just do all of it. And so up until I stopped doing music years ago, I would do a full band tour, all the way around the world, like from, California to Tokyo, and then, come back, wash the blood out of my mouth, and then leave again and do the whole lap over again on my own. And I would do this continually. I'd come back from the talking tour and go right into band practice, write songs, make a record, go on tour, and start the whole cycle over again. And then I stopped doing music, and now I just do the shows on my own. But I started doing like that double touring thing from 1985 until about 2002 or 3, like continuously. So I would tour as like two completely different entities.
Also, when I look at your tour schedule, you're often doing like back-to-back shows.
Yeah.
For weeks at a time.
Yeah, up to 44. Like last year on the European tour, where I was in Iceland, the last chunk of it was 44 shows in a row. I think the last day off was like Slovenia or Slovakia, somewhere like that. And then it was just a show a night until we finished in England. And that's, the agent, the people who book the shows, they're like, really? Like, we don't work with anyone who does this. Are you sure you want this many shows? And I went, well, actually, I'd like more. And I noticed there's a day off. Like on March 10th is a day off. Can you find us a show? They're like, yeah, we'll try, you maniac. But you don't have to push an agent too hard to try and find you a show, because when you are on stage, they get paid. And so that's one of the better relationships in the entertainment business, I guess. But the people I travel with, like road manager Ward, the Australian tour manager I've been working with since like 2006, neither of us like nights off. And it's not about money or fame, because I've never had much of either, believe it or not. Well, that is actually quite believable. But it's not about, hey, we're going to make a lot of money. It's just like, it's a Tuesday night. Let's, and what are we doing tonight? Sitting in a parking lot of a hotel, because like we never get a hotel room. The bus driver, he'll get a hotel room. We just camp out on the bus. And by 8 p.m., like you're bored, like, sitting in the bus watching TV, or if you're in Europe or Australia, a night off, you're in a hotel. And, as exciting as it gets for me is I find a coffee place and I work on a book manuscript, or I can work out extra hard because I don't have a show that night, but I'd rather be on stage. And that's just, I learned that in Black Flag, where sometimes we would do 2 shows a night. You do like the 7 and the 10. And, try that with Black Flag music. Like, you better be in good shape, because like one of those shows will kill you too. Like me and the drummer, we would look at each other like, oh man, okay. Like, like we'll probably be dead. Like in 4 hours, it'll be okay because we'll be dead. And we would just laugh about it. Like, yep, tonight we die. Because it's Dallas, Texas in August, and there's no breathable air by the 3rd song. And the singer and the drummer are just like huffing and puffing the whole night. And it's like, 105 degrees inside the venue, and you're going to do it again. In an hour and a half, you go out on stage and you hit the same thing again. And then, collapse on some punk rocker's floor for 5 hours and drive to Houston, whatever. I learned that kind of metabolism of touring. That's like Black Flag touring. And I brought that into the Rollins Band and then onto my own touring. And luckily, I have found people to work with who, like, I've been working with this woman named Heidi, who manages me and helps me work with my companies. We've been working together for 26 years. She knows me very well. Like she's the smart one. And I've also been working with another woman at my companies for like 27 years. I mean, I've had these long relationships with people I work with, and they kind of know how I want to do it. And so they go, okay. And what seems to be kind of crazy, they just get used to it. Like, the touring, the way we tour, road manager Ward and I, we wouldn't do it any other way. So
Right.
you just have to find the right people.
So with that mindset, you didn't get a lot of panic when Black Flag was over. You just kept on going.
Well, I realized, the band broke up in like July of 1986. And by October of 1986, I was in Leeds, England, making my first little solo record. And I realized if I must, as they say, hit the ground running, if I don't hit the ground and make something happen, I'm going to, I'll sit still for too long. And so I was smart enough, the band broke up, and literally the afternoon the band broke up, I was writing a song that ended up on my first record. And I was, as I said, in the studio with the band, 2 Americans, 2 Brits, in a small recording studio in Leeds, England, in October 86, making a record called Hot Animal Machine. By October 87, the Rollins Band is in the same studio with Ian MacKaye producing, making the Lifetime album, which we wrote on the road touring with, me and Andrew and Sim and Chris. And there was no pause. I realized I either make it happen, like, again, sink or swim. I chose to swim. frantically. And there's nothing like, youth and desperation. It's not the worst mix, actually. Desperation. I don't want you to be locked in a dungeon and be desperate that way, but desperate to not fail. You never know. You might get some good results from that.
Right. Had you worked with Chris before, the guitar player from Hot Animal Machine and the Rollins Band? He's like a childhood friend, right?
I grew up with him, and he's he's one of the smartest people I've ever met. Speaks multiple languages. Like he's incredible. And so he was living in England because he went to university in Leeds. And I would see him on Black Flag tours. When Black Flag would be in England, Chris would come and hang out. And I grew up with him. And we made a joke one day. We were walking in London. I had a day off, and we're walking together in London. And he said, well, if Black Flag ever breaks up, like, haha, like that'll ever happen. Let's make a record. I went, let's do it. And so Black Flag, of course, breaks up a couple of years later. I'm in Washington, D.C. Chris is there. I called him at his parents' house. I said, Chris, the Eagle has landed. Black Flag is broken up. And it's almost like he was waiting for my phone call. He's like, okay, I know a bass player and a drummer. We got this. I'm like, okay. And, he had this band in England. And so we used his drummer, a bass player friend of his. Look, it was 3 Americans and 1 British guy. British drummer, American bass player, his friend, a guy named Bernie, who's just a Washington, D.C. guy, just one of Chris's music friends. And we all flew out to Leeds because Chris had an apartment there. And so we all lived in Chris's freezing apartment, wrote songs, and went and recorded them. And that became my first solo record. I came back with this tape under my arm. I couldn't even pay for the 2-inch tape. The 2-inch tape, the multi-track, got recorded over the next day by some other band.
No way.
And so I only came home with the 1/4-inch final mixes. I could barely afford the plane flights. And so came back, got a record deal. And by 87, the record came out. I had a band. And the band got together in April of 87. By May, we're on the road. And we had a full American and US and European tour booked somehow. And we came to the end of it, made the record. And my bandmates flew home, and I stayed and went right back on tour on my own. Met up with Lydia Lunch in London, and went back and did the kind of the same tour I had just done with the band with Lydia. And that tour ended, it went October, November, December, ended in Switzerland in December. And I flew back to Los Angeles with the Lifetime tape under my arm, barely able to afford taxi, cab fare to get from the airport to my apartment I was living in. Broke again, as always. And so the band ended up doing very well. It made records and toured all over the world for many years. But it's that, again, that ethos of Black Flag. It's like go, go, go. You see adversity, you just run at it. It's not even an idea about being tough. It's the idea of just not giving up. It's the idea of resolve rather than ambition. And the two are very different. I'd rather have resolve than ambition. The ambitious guy is going to walk on your hands to get where he wants to go. The guy with resolve, he's just not going to stop. Death, you might kill him, but that's the only way you're going to stop him. I'd rather be that guy than the one injuring someone to get where I want to go.
Also, like there for a time in the 90s, you were like somewhat of a mainstream figurehead for punk music, bringing new people in,
Well, what do you mean, like being on?
Or would you not agree?
Or no, what you mean, like being on MTV and stuff?
Yeah, you were like all over.
Oh yeah, no, I was going for it as hard as I could, trying to plant my flag on the moon. I figured more press and notoriety, the better it would be for me and my band. Like I wanted to get our music out there. And so in those days, you could show up at MTV and they go like, hey, what are you doing this afternoon? Like, nothing. Well, come and host a show. Okay. And so I would be on MTV as often as they would let me. Hey, you want to be in a magazine writing an article? Yeah. You want to be in a photo? Yeah. I was just putting my face in the place. Hey, we're a radio station. You want to do an interview? Yeah. Like anybody with a microphone or a camera, I'm like right in front of them, unapologetically. And
Yeah, felt like you sent that message like to the non-sellout 90s that it was okay to, pay your rent.
yeah. If you give me money, like I get to buy really exciting things like bass strings and snare drum heads and gasoline for the van. And like to this day, if you give me money, I just make projects. I drive a Mazda 6. I'm sitting in a small cold room built for me by builder guys where I do my voice work for my little radio show. I'm sitting in an attic. Um, all of the clothes I'm wearing right now, I bought most of them at Walmart and Amazon.com. I am kind of a cheap living person. I woke up this morning. I sleep in a sleeping bag on top of a fully made bed. I'm a simple person. Work is what's important to me. If you gave me a ton of money, I wouldn't get a different car. I would just do the projects that I'm working on right now a little faster. I'd be able to bring someone in to help me scan images where I'm not scanning them on my own. I could have someone scan them for me so I could do 5 other things. And so in those days, people would sometimes like, oh, you're trying to be this big. Like, no, man, I'm just trying to get out there. And finally making some money, it's so amazing to be able to pay your rent, and to be able to buy the equipment needed to go on tour. Like if you're on tour with a band, you're going through equipment, like you're just destroying it as you go. Like strings break, gear breaks all the time, like all the time. Microphones just fall apart. And so it's a high rate of consumption of gear that you're going through. So when the band finally started making some money, like when my book company started making money, I used all of that to get an office. I had a damn office. Like, yay, I got a staff. Like, we're doing stuff. We can now put out Nick Cave's books in America. I can put out The Birthday Party, like one of my favorite bands. I can put out Alan Vega records, the guy from Suicide. You give me money, I'm doing stuff. I'm making things happen. I'm still living in a crap apartment. But we're making things happen. And so there'd be contentious interviews like, how come I'm seeing you in a movie? Because the guy said, hey, can you act? And I said, no, but let me try anyway. Because I'm Henry from the ice cream store. I have no illusions. I'm the minimum wage guy who got into a crazy band in the summer of 1981. I'm still that guy. And I've been in films with everyone from Al Pacino to Will Smith. I've met all of those kind of people. I don't have their phone numbers. I'm not trying to hang out with them. It's just been an interesting ride. But at the end of the day, I get up every day and I work. Like every day. I work 7 days a week. I'm obsessed with my dopey little projects like books and radio shows and whatever else. And I've got a lot of work I'll be doing this year. I won't be on the road, sadly, but I still have, I'm up to my eyeballs in, obligation and expectation. And it's not about money. It's about output. I'm going to try and put out 3 books this year. My manager, she's going to argue with me. She's going to opt for 2, but I'm going to press for 3 because I've got them done. There's about like 500,000 words waiting to get the final edit, which we're going to start in February. But it's not about, hey, we're all going to get rich and sit on our behinds. It's like we're going to get these things done so we can get the next project started.
Right. So I read your new book. It's called Sick.
Oh, thanks.
And that you released just over a year ago.
Yeah.
And you cover a few bases. You're talking about your friend Joe Cole,
Yep.
and also just the state of America, like the police, school shootings, death penalty. A lot of it was uh, kind of tough to read,
Yeah, it was written that way.
but then you do have this hilarious part where you're dealing with online scammers.
Yeah, and all of that is all truly taken from interactions I had. It was the beginning of COVID. You can't go anywhere. Like, and so I'm like, okay, well, this idiot like wants to take my money. Let's have some fun. And it's a kind of writing I really enjoy because you can just, be a be a maniac. And these you turn these people who are trying to scam you, you turn them into unwitting dupes who get pulled into your into your world of BS. And it's to me it's perfect comedy.
It is. It's really good. Like Andrew Guzman in Space Force, Amanda, like amazing
Yeah,
characters.
thank
You
you.
know,
Yeah.
that
Aha.
was
Yeah.
hilarious.
Andre,
Right.
Andre,
Aha.
aha. Yeah, it's just, it's sheer stupidity. But to actually make these people lose their temper, it's the best. Like to get a human reaction out of these people. Like, you got to them. And that was I sunk their battleship. And they would like write me like, yeah, how dare you? like, oh, really? You're trying to steal from me and you're angry? It's funny. And so yeah, and I'm sure that the word sick, means thus. And that basically, sets is the kind of the message of the book. There's my writing with no restraint whatsoever. There's all the anger, there's all the sadness, and there's all the opinions with no filter whatsoever. I wrote the book, in solitude, and I gave it to my manager. Heidi and I, we do the final edit of my book by reading it out loud. And like, one weekend I send her the manuscript, and by Monday she's like, "Really? Or we're gonna put this out?" I'm like, "Yeah." She went, "Okay." And people seem to like it, which is always interesting.
I mean, a lot of stuff in your past is angry. I feel like this is more maybe relaxed anger or something. Disappointment.
Yeah, and the when I write about the United States of America, in the age of Trump, or as I call him now, P01135809, his felon number, um, that writing, it comes from anger and disappointment that the American experiment, like now you're seeing it, like the sheet has been pulled off the thing, and you're seeing like it was never about equality. It was always about money and corruption. It's always just been about capitalism, and slavery never went away. It just went into the infrastructure. And they go, oh, the founding fathers would be rolling in their graves. The founding fathers would probably be really proud of a guy like Donald Trump, or a guy like George W. Bush, or Ronald Reagan, where the money keeps going to the top and America's more and more corporatized. And they would go like, good, finally, like, the aristocrats have all the money and everyone else is on the plantation. And so a lot of that, that kind of anger comes out in that book, because it's what I think about a lot when I look at this country. I think the United States of America, it's a mixed bag. Like we gave the world, P-Funk and the Bad Brains and Jane's Addiction. Like there's really good stuff, like John Coltrane, Jimi Hendrix, James Brown. And then, we gave the Southeast Asia Agent Orange and Napalm. Like, and you can't curse on the radio. The country that gave you napalm, and you can't curse on the radio. Like the hypocrisy is unbelievable. And I don't know, it's sometimes very hard to live in this country because of the hypocrisy. And a cop shooting some kid 17 times, like no one gets in trouble. Like, huh? It's where you look at the news and you're like, what? This is real? And then at the same time, of like the 90 countries I've been to, I can't think of any other country I'd rather live in but this one. I like it here.
So you think you'll never leave the U.S.?
At this point, no. because I'm making plans here that will probably like almost cement me in the United States of America. And it could very well be, in the effort of keeping it real. Why do I like it so much? Because I'm a Caucasian, educated, heterosexual male. And when you are that combination, there's a good chance that the brochure of America, like, hey, it's the greatest place, that is true for a guy like me, where a high school graduate, which is all I am, can do very well by at least the standards my father had, which was like successful people are rich. And that was his complete and only idea of success in this country. It wasn't about being honest or kind or good. It was about having money. And so as far as being a success, on a lot of evaluations, a lot of tests, you can say that I've been very successful and continue to be successful. But how much of that is white privilege? That it's basically like, as they say, using a baseball metaphor, you were born on second, you stole third, and you think you're a baseball player. So to be a white male, educated, heterosexual in the United States of America, you've got a leg up on literally millions of Americans, like who are going to have a life of, driving an Uber and being slightly upside down on their mortgage, not able to pay, or, a divorce and 2 kids where every day is like this tricky maze of not spilling the soup, just. And so I realized that a lot of the success I've had, it was not the goal. The goal was not to make money. The goal was to be like art guy, like to make things. And maybe because I'm a white male heterosexual who can finish a sentence, maybe I've been able to realize those objectives because of where I was born, when I was born, and the fact that I'm a heterosexual white male. And it's not like I wake up feeling guilty, but I do make a conscious effort not to make it worse. And that's a trickier endeavor than you might think in this country. It's very easy to be part of a problem unwittingly, and being part of a solution becomes far more complex, a more nuanced performance, as they say.
I see we're almost out of time, so I really want to thank you for coming on, man.
Well, you're very welcome. Thanks for the interest.
You're releasing your 4th installment of Stay Fanatic later this year?
I'm going to try. That's the book that'll be in contention with good old Heidi. I'll be working on it later today, actually. I have 1 or 2 more scans to go and 1 more draft of proofreading, and I'll bring it to the boss, and I'll see if she'll let me put it out this year.
Well, it was an honor and a pleasure, and hope I'll talk to you later sometime.
Well, I hope thank you. I hope I didn't answer too long in any of the answers, and you didn't get all of your questions asked. I tend to run long. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's cool, man. It was awesome.
All right. Well, have a great week, and thank you again. And hopefully we'll meet at some point down the road.
All right, that was my conversation with Henry Rollins. What an awesome guy. And just so unbelievably sweet. So thank you guys for tuning in to Peeling the Onion. I really do appreciate it. My name is Elvar, and I'll be coming at you soon. I got great interviews lined up, so tune in and take care of each other. Thanks.